Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. They're talking about a middleweight title fight taking place in September between champion Gennady Golovkin and challenger Grzegorz Proksa. Now, I have a strong preference in this fight. I actually think that the fight ends by knockout, right? More conservative bettors will just take one fighter to win the match. And I believe the winner will be Gennady Golovkin. Let's talk about why. And let me just point out, I'm a big fan of Proksa. He's on my Dwyer 10countboxing.blogspot.com page even after his loss to Kerry Hope, which he avenged. I took Proksa against Sebastian Sylvester. But styles make fights. This is a very bad style matchup for Proksa. I believe he ultimately gets walked down and stopped. Let's talk about why. Now, first, understand who Gennady Golovkin is. You may know that he's one of the unbeaten middleweight champions, but understand he has a long pedigree. As an amateur, he beat Andy Lee. He knocked out Lucien Bute. Bute got up, but they called the fight. He beat Andre Durrell. As a pro, he has a string of knockouts that is several years long. Understand, he has not had to go the distance since 2008. Now, there are stories online. You can just Google them. There's a site, I believe it's Sherdog, SHERDOG.net, that has stories of Golovkin sparring some of the better known fighters in the sport and making them look bad in sparring. So there's stories of him sparring Canelo, making Canelo look bad. There's stories of him sparring Alfredo Angulo, making him look bad. The more intriguing stories have him sparring Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., who is also an unbeaten middleweight champion, and having him look awful. And of course, there's stories of him sparring Kid Chocolate Peter Quillen and making him look bad as well. People in the sport know who Golovkin is. Golovkin has been the WBA middleweight champion for some time, since 2010. Now, let me say, he is trained by Abel Sanchez. And you may recall Abel Sanchez is the guy who trained Carson Jones, right? Golovkin fights a lot like Carson Jones. In other words, he likes to walk you down. But he likes to do so without throwing a lot of jabs on the way in. Right? He wants to literally walk past your defensive construct. When he gets inside, he has a very hard left hook. He has a very effective straight right hand. He can also throw uppercuts. The key to Golovkin is that he throws short punches. In other words, he somehow is able to generate leverage by throwing short punches. In another generation, Golovkin would be heavyweight Joe Louis. Right? Now, let me just say, what I'm about to say is very controversial. Boxing doesn't have one master book where everyone agrees on everything. There are people in the game with a lot of knowledge who will dispute and disagree with what I have to say next. Darren Barker, as many know, guy who I've, picked in fights. Darren Barker was ringside as part of the announcing team for the Kell Brook Carson Jones fight. And I thought Carson Jones was fighting an excellent fight. He's losing the early rounds, but he's walking up to Kell Brook. Understand, if you're outside against Kell Brook, you're another victim, right? You've got to get Kell Brook on his back foot. You've got to get him backing up. You've got to get him thinking about your pressure. But Darren Barker didn't like it because, of course, on the way in, Carson Jones was not throwing a lot of punches. He had a high guard. He was guarding against Kell Brook, but on the way in, he was giving away rounds because he wasn't throwing high volume to get inside on Kell Brook. And Darren Barker said that Carson Jones's style looked amateurish. In fact, the consensus on the British telecast early in the Kell Brook Carson Jones fight was, as they put it, that Kell Brook was fighting a picture-perfect fight. Now understand, Gennady Golovkin fights the same way as Carson Jones. So he's going to be coming forward. He's not going to be jabbing his way in. Because if you jab your way in, you leave yourself open to counters. Right? So he's going to try to literally just walk up to Proksa, who has a high knockout percentage. Early in this fight, I expect Proksa to be on his back foot and to actually be able to throw punches, turn to the side, turn Gennady Golovkin, who will just be looking like a stalker with his hands up, not throwing a lot of punches. More importantly, the Abel Sanchez style calls for his fighters to run red lights. In other words, the other fighter will be feinting. Think Vladimir Klitschko, right? He's throwing a jab. He's feinting a right hand. Think David Haye. These guys are outside. They're feinting punches to do damage to you. And Proksa fights a lot like Roy Jones. So he's going to have his hands down. He's going to have his hands low. He's going to be feinting left hooks. He's going to be feinting violence. So you're going to want to stay away from him. But understand, in the Sanchez model, the way Sanchez has his fighters fight, and you saw this clearly in the Carson Jones fight, you have your hands up and you're walking forward. You're daring the other fighter to throw the punches they're hinting at. Right? If an Abel Sanchez fighter were to fight Vladimir Klitschko, I get the feeling it would be the right way to fight Vladimir Klitschko, because you would have to get by his defensive construct. If you stay outside and you start, rolling with his feints, unfortunately, you're going to be outside, getting hit by his jab, being in his power zone. Let me go further. With the Abel Sanchez technique, you can't allow yourself to get clinched or turned. Right? In other words, if you come inside and the other fighter reaches forward to grab you, then at that point you've got to throw punches. You've got to move to the side yourself. You've got to knock his hand down. You've got to work his body. You've got to do things that's going to prevent the guy you're stalking from being able to neutralize you by just clinching. Right? So you'll notice in the Carson Jones fight, Kell Brook is trying to clinch Carson Jones. Doesn't do a good job of it. But when Kell Brook is not clinching, Carson Jones is not clinching. Right? The whole point of the strategy is to wear out your opponent, to get inside of where they're good, and to literally back them up against the ropes, force them to fight, hit them with hard shots. It's to get inside, right? Another thing you have to do to avoid them reaching forward and clinching you is to come in at an angle, right? You'll notice Carson Jones isn't right in front of Kell Brook. He's trying to come in at an angle. He's, making sure that he's hard to grab, that he's hard to slow down, right? I believe Abel Sanchez fighters also read their opponent's feet. Now let me just say this. In talking about the David Haye, Derek Chisora fight, Chisora made a couple of mistakes in that fight. One was dropping his hands as he came inside, right? Chisora is not as defensively gifted as Gennady Golovkin is, right? You'll notice Golovkin is going to be catching a lot of shots on his forearms, right? Derek Chisora came in, had his hands up early, started to drop his hands. But Derek Chisora also got fooled by David Haye. Let's give the Haymaker credit. This was probably the best I've seen the Haymaker. Let's say Derek Chisora is looking at Haymaker's feet. He knows Haymaker's right-handed. Some fighters who are coming in will only be worried if their opponent has their left foot out in front, right? Because that's when a righty is prepared to throw a power punch, power right hand, or a lead left hook. David Haye, and give him credit, David Haye has his right foot in front and is able to get off the left hand that leads to the first knockdown that changes that fight. So Derek Chisora, if he was reading Haye's feet, may have thought that Haye could hit him, but the worst that could happen would be he would be stunned. I don't think he expected Haye to be able to knock him down. Well, here, Gennady Golovkin is going to come inside. He'll be reading Proksa's feet, right? And if Proksa's feet aren't in positions that would suggest that Proksa can get leverage, in other words, if his feet are together instead of one foot being in front of the other, right? If Proksa is facing him in a way where his dominant hand is out front, it's not in back, then Abel Sanchez fighters know to pounce, right? So I believe here we're going to have a situation where Proksa's going to look good early, right? Just like Kell Brook looked good early against Carson Jones. Proksa's going to look good early. But understand, this is a 12-round fight. And sooner or later, the pressure, in my opinion, is going to get to him. What he's going to find out is that he can't run for 12 rounds, and he can't keep his hands low for 12 rounds, right? Golovkin is going to force him to fight. And I just don't think that Proksa has the defense to withstand this kind of offensive attack. Understand, Golovkin is a puncher. He hits a lot harder pound for pound than Carson Jones. Let me also say this too. If you look at the film of the Jean Pascal Bernard Hopkins fight, you're going to see that Hopkins is stalking Pascal the whole fight. And it's interesting because Pascal claimed in interviews that Hopkins just flails his hands and jumps inside. You know, that's actually shrewd, because if I'm coming inside and, you know, I'm able to kind of like throw punches, let's say I'm throwing a left hand and I have that left hand up and my head crouched, then that's a great defensive construct, right? Because it's hard for an opponent, if I always have my head down, to hit my chin, right? Take a look at Gennady Golovkin's head. You're going to see he almost always has it tucked, right? I believe that, in the 90s, when Roy Jones unveiled what I believe is this ambush style that people like David Hay and Pascal openly idolizes Roy Jones, have copied, right? I believe in the 1990s, people were afraid to bum rush Roy Jones. The idea was if they came in throwing punches, Jones had superior hand speed, and he'd be able to counter them, and he had the legs to stay away from them. This is 2012, right? I believe Abel Sanchez has come up with a formula where you can get close to a Roy Jones by not throwing punches, by walking in and forcing him to back up. And keep in mind, in terms of skill set, Golovkin throws hard punches very short. It won't take much for him to get inside and then to stun Proksa with his punching power. I expect Gennady Golovkin to win this fight. I believe he has a chance at the knockout. I would straddle Golovkin to win. With Proksa by KO, Proksa hits hard and does have a puncher's chance, but I will say this, I'd be surprised if Proksa's able to get the knockout. In other words, I fully expect Golovkin to win this fight, and I'm expecting him to look good doing it. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments for me here online. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com. Thanks for watching.